Hey everyone, we are out here today. We're going to do a little work on the old Benelli, the TNT 135. I've got my son over here with me. He is a certified motorcycle mechanic. We are going to do a valve adjustment on it. I noticed the other day when we were riding around that there was some ticking noise coming from inside the engine, and we think the valves need to be adjusted. They recommend doing it around 600 miles. I'm getting upwards close to 800, so it's probably about time to do it. But we're going to walk through it and take the bike apart, adjust the valves, and show you how we do it. Here we go. Alright, so basically what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and take off the whole front cowling as one piece. To do that, you're going to need to take out this screw. There's a screw, or excuse me, a bolt on this side as well as on the other side. There's a bolt down here as well as on the other side. And then we'll move up to the front. There's a bolt right there, right there, right there, and then there's also one on the side, on each side, and you're going to want to remove all of those. You're actually not required to move all of these on the inside. You don't have to touch them because we're going to just lift it off as one unit. And then you can go ahead, you got to be careful, you got to make sure nothing's attached, and then it should just all lift off as one piece, up and out. Alright, so the next step, we're going to be removing the tank. That's going to be a very, very easy step, and we're not actually going to remove the tank all the way. We're actually just going to lift it up and move it off to one side so we can gain access to the valve cover. To remove the tank, you're going to want to remove this bolt, that bolt, and that bolt. Once you remove all four of those, the tank should just lift right off. And then we're going to leave everything connected, and we're just going to move it off to the side, something like that. Make sure you're not pulling too hard, make sure you're not tugging anything where it feels like it doesn't want to go. Don't force it. There's a lot of rubber hoses and stuff can come undone and break, and it's no fun. So the next step is going to be to remove this hose. We can remove that with a pair of pliers or whatever you prefer. Slide that back just a little bit. This hose should just come right off. That's just a little breather. And then we're going to want to loosen these four bolts. There's one on that side, there's one up front, and then there are two on the other side of this little cover. We're going to take those off, and then we're going to lift this whole cover up and out. Alright, so removing the actual cover, the cover can be a bit stuck at times, so you just need to pop it. When you're actually doing that, you take a flathead screwdriver and you're going to want to put it right in here. Be careful not to be up against the rubber seal. You'll see it a lot better if you're actually doing this, but there's a rubber seal and then there's a part where there's an open gap. You want to make sure this flathead is in between that open gap, and then you should just be able to pop it just a little bit. You do want to be careful doing this, making sure you're not damaging anything. Come on. Just work it nice and slow, nice and easy. You'll see it start to come up. When it gives a little bit, it becomes very easy. Just like that. And then we can lift it up and out. Beautiful. Alright, so next step after you've taken the cover off is we're going to need to rotate the motor. We're going to have to rotate it to a certain position so that you can actually measure valve clearance. To do that, you're going to want to first put the motor in its highest gear. That way you can actually rotate the rear wheel and then in turn rotate the motor. Make sure you rotate the wheel in its actual direction of rotation. Try not to rotate it backwards, it could damage stuff in the motor. It's not that big of a deal if you do rotate it backwards. It shouldn't break anything, but it just reduces the risk. So to do that, to make sure we're actually at the point that we want to be at, we're gonna have to remove this cover. It does take a specialty tool normally, but we're using our specialty tool, a quarter and a pair of pliers. Just slide it in there and then rotate that cap off. Real nice and easy. You can do with a flat blade screwdriver, but this method prevents any damage to the actual cover there. And then once you get down in here, you're gonna notice along the top of the threads there's a little line that's gonna index with the lines indicating where we need to be for the motor actually in that hole. So there'll be two lines that actually line up.
Alright, so I wanted to clarify a little something here. In the video we talked a little bit about removing that cover on the side of the engine. So what you're doing is when you're looking down inside that hole, you're looking for a line that's going to align with the gap in the threads on that hole. So this here is looking straight down on the hole. It's a little difficult to try and get the camera in there, so we thought we'd do a little drawing and show you what we're looking at. So as you're rotating the tire on the back of the bike, the engine itself is going to rotate. And when the engine rotates, there's a piece inside there that you're going to see scrolling by the hole, scrolling by the little window, and it has marks on it. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to stop your rotation of your tire when the mark that says T1 and then there's a line, when that lines up with the gap in the back of the threads. There's a gap back here on the threads, and when the line on the metal piece that's inside there that says T1 lines up with that, that's where you want to stop.
Alright, so when you're actually going in and checking valve clearance, you want to make sure that the rocker arm, which is going to be the top part of the valve, I'll show you real quick. This is going to be the top part. This piece here, this top piece here, we're going to be basically checking in between this top piece and the spring. You'll see where they actually connect right in there by my finger. Hopefully we can see all that. And we're going to be checking that with a feeler gauge. Now you want to make sure that they're not actually touching. To do so, that's why we put the motor in its highest gear. That's why we're rotating the rear tire. That's why we took off the cover on the other side. Once you take off the cover on the other side, you can see the little indication mark. Once the indication mark is visible and lined up on the other side, then you can go ahead and you can actually reach in here and you can feel that top part of the valve. You can feel it move just slightly. Now it's not going to be very dramatic, or it shouldn't be very dramatic movement. It should be just a little bit of movement. That little bit of movement indicates that it is actually not touching the valve. If there's absolutely no movement, you're going to want to rotate the motor 365 degrees again until you see the mark on the other side, and then it should be able to move just a little bit. We're only talking about 0.1 of a millimeter, so sweet.
Alright, so one other thing I wanted to clarify. It was a little bit difficult to actually film the part where we checked the gap on the valves themselves. So I wanted to kind of do a little drawing here of that as well and show you exactly what we did and how it's performed. So this is kind of a rudimentary drawing of the side of the engine, and this is the valve here itself. I'll show you a picture of the actual engine so you get a reference of what we're looking at. Now, normally you're not going to see an actual space in here. I mean, we're talking hundredths of an inch clearance between the valve and the spring there. So you're typically not going to see a gap there. For illustrative purposes, we have a gap on the drawing here just so you can see where you're doing it. So what you're going to do is once you've got the engine to the proper rotation and you got the valves and everything in place, we talked a little bit about how you kind of check by moving this here and making sure that they're not touching to see that you actually are in the proper location. Then you're going to use your feeler gauge. I'll show you a picture of what a feeler gauge is. Basically, it's just a thin piece of metal that's an exact thickness so that you can slide it in the gap there and check to see whether or not the gap is actually that thickness. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your feeler gauge and you're actually going to place it in here. All right, your feeler gauge is going to go right in between there. It takes a little bit of practice to kind of understand whether or not you have the proper gap. When you put the feeler gauge in there, you should feel a slight bit of resistance, not much. And then as you pull it out, it should come out very smoothly with just a little bit of resistance. If you're able to slide the feeler gauge into there and slide it out with no resistance at all, then you have too large a gap. If you're putting it in there and you have to force it in, and it feels like it's grabbing and it's tugging and it's very difficult to get in there, that means you have too small a gap. And then you're going to have to do an adjustment. There's a little nut on the top of the valve there. You're going to turn that, and that loosens the valve so that you can make the adjustment by turning the screw up and down, moving this part up and down, making either a larger gap or a smaller gap. And then you tighten the set screw back down on the top, and then again check it with your feeler gauge. And that's how you adjust your valve. Pretty simple. All right, so we've gone through and done the adjustments on it. My son has actually gone through and done the adjustments. You kind of saw how we went through it. I actually didn't need any adjustments on the valves. They were all within specs, all within proper clearance. So we're going to go ahead, put it all back together, fire it up, make sure that we didn't screw anything up, and then we'll go from there. All right, so that does it for doing the valve adjustment on the bike. If you have any questions, please leave your questions in the comments below. We'd be happy to answer them however we can. If we have to make more videos, we'd be happy to do that. So thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do so. It'd be greatly appreciated. And as always, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.